I request uh, gentlemen and ladies standing in the corner there to occupy seat. And may I request the housekeeping staff here to close the door. Jara darwaja please band kar do. Good evening, friends. I think we can start the live session. Is started live. Okay. Okay. No, but okay. Whilst we have the technology into action, which always is, sometimes the case. Uh, Let me give you a small background and introduction of why we are here today and what is this today's workshop all about. So, ESG is a new catchphrase, and all businesses, large businesses to be specific, are gaining familiarity with it. There's a regulatory compliance, as I mentioned a couple of days ago in some other in some other forum. The top 1,000 companies listed on BSE are now required to do their BRSR reporting, which is essentially, ESG related compliances. So the concept of ESG emerges from the fact that over a period of time and with the climate change and also more responsibility towards environment, people around, it is felt that a business should have more objectives than just maximization of profits. Traditionally, all businesses were evaluated and were established with the sole objective of making money or maximization of profit. There are few exceptions to that when only profit making was not the objective. And in our country, we have a very fine example of the Tata Group, whose objective of being in business is not only making money, but also discharging the obligations towards society, people, environment, and all other stakeholders. But that's on a voluntary basis. Over a period of time, when the industrialization matured and economies matured, and and governments all over the world felt that, and also we have had huge climate impact that's happening. We had people impact of business. Business being traditionally, when we were an agrarian economies globally a couple of centuries ago, and business presence of businesses in day-to-day life of people did not make so much of a difference. But today, large businesses or small businesses, the way of earning money is not agrarian or giving some services. Your industrialization and subsequently growing of tertiary sector has ensured that more and more people are now formally employed in businesses. So business has a role to play, not only in providing employment, but also it has its impact of, apart from generating employment, on all other areas, which is basically the environment and society at large. And since the businesses were not discharging their obligation in the expected manner, governments had to come up with compliances to ensure that these businesses follow not only profit maximization or apart from profit and discharge the obligation towards other stakeholders, which is basically the environment and society at large. So that's how we see that now, whether we like it or not, going forward, if not voluntary, involuntary, we'll have to comply to these requirements. So we as a sector, a logistics sector, have to gear up and familiarize with the concept and get ourselves ready for the upcoming changes. To begin with, they're voluntary, and in time to come, they'll be regulatory. So with that objective and with that future being clearly seen, we realize that it's important as AMTOI. AMTOI is a 25-year-old organization which is for promoting multimodal transportation and anything that pertains to logistics industry which requires an attention, which requires industry involvement, which requires gathering of knowledge and dissemination of knowledge. So we said that why not AMTOI take this initiative and build up that awareness about ESG in the industry, and in time to come, through this series of these workshops, create a roadmap which then becomes easy for everybody to understand and follow. And that will also save everybody's time in terms of individually each organization learning about what ESG is all about. So with that small introduction, I request Dr. Mehta to come to the dais and introduce our honorable speakers here who are going to share their knowledge for the session today. Over to you, Dr. Mehta.
Thank you, Vivek. I think very nicely and briefly explained the preamble of why we think it's necessary now to, have people and interact with ideas. And that is why the very reason that we've called this meeting. Before I go further, let me introduce myself. My name is Neville Mehta. I also have my colleague here, Abhishek Talwar. Abhishek, will you please rise wherever you are? We both are here present. We have another Mr. Prasad Modak, who's not here today. But we, three of us, are helping the AMTOI Council for their ESG initiative. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, let me first go through the dais that we have. Starting from our chief guest, none other than Mr. Rajiv Jalota, IAS, Chairman of Bombay Port Trust. So thank you for being here. We also have Mr. Rakesh Kumar, who's the president of the CSI, former president of CSIR and NEERI. We have Anurag Sehgal, MD Pricewaterhouse, who is also over here, and Pritish Biswal, who's from Pricewaterhouse. Both of them will jointly make a presentation. We have Mr. R.D. Tripathi over here also, who will also help us and give us some his initiatives that he has taken up at the Bombay Port Trust. We have Dr. Miraj Inamdar over here too, who is the senior faculty of the NSC. And we have Sivranjani Subramaniam, who's from eConnect, and she will talk about certain things that we do in port. I will introduce each one of them individually as and when they get up. But it's now time for our chief guest to inaugurate this thing. And before I call on him, I would like to inform you what he's all about. I've had the pleasure of working with him with the European Union, and when I was CEO of Mumbai First. And he's a delightful man to work with. I will officially introduce him. He's a Master of Science in Chemistry from Lucknow University. He joined Indian Administrative Service in 1988 and is currently working in the rank of Secretary of the Government of India. May I call him Rajiv, if you don't mind? Rajiv belongs to Maharashtra cadre of IAS and worked as CEO of Zilla Parishad, Osmanabad, District Collector of Yavatmal and Latur districts in his initial years. While in service, Rajiv completed his master's in International Development Policy from Duke University, United States. On his return from USA, Rajiv worked as Managing Director of CCOM, followed by a full stint as Chief Executive Officer of Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation. He also served as Commissioner of Employment and Self-Employment of Maharashtra State before joining the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai as Additional Municipal Commissioner Projects. In the Municipal Corporation, Rajiv handled finance, budgets, slum sanitation, water supply, sewage management, assessment and collection department. He introduced the capital value system in property tax in Mumbai, and this is very interesting. Rajiv worked as Commissioner Sales Tax for Maharashtra from January 2015 and was part of the national law and policy making process of GST till he demitted office. He successfully implemented GST in Maharashtra state. Rajiv was awarded with the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Public Administration in 2017 as part of a group which worked for bringing GST to reality. Rajiv had a tenure of more than 5 years in GST. He was also responsible for managing the Corona Control Room of Maharashtra State. Presently, he is chairperson of Mumbai Port Authority and Indian Ports Association. Rajiv is instrumental in developing the largest international cruise terminal of the country at Mumbai Port, chairing a committee for enhancing and improving urban water transport in Mumbai Harbour and representing India in the Quad Shipping Task Force. With these few words, may I request all of you to please welcome our chief guest, Mr. Rajiv Jalota. Rajiv ji, can you please inaugurate and say a few words?
Thank you, Neville, for a very generous and profuse introduction. All my friends on the dais and all the colleagues and who are conscious about environment of the dais. Mr. Neville spoke to me that I should introduce what initiatives are being done by Mumbai Port as far as environment is concerned. But I believe Mr. Tripathi, who is heading the Mumbai Port Sustainability Foundation, and Sivaranjani, they will be speaking more about it. So I should not repeat those things. But I would like to just briefly tell you how we got about making the Mumbai Port Sustainability Foundation. Because I had been working in MIDC as CEO, and today Dr. Rakesh Kumar is also here, and I think that time we engaged NERI to make a document for us that how can we have a clean and green MIDC. That time, besides all kinds of pollution issues, we were also toying with the idea of that how waste that gets generated in MIDC should not go out of MIDC. But we never knew the word of circularity that time. That is now the buzzword. But I think that document got made, we started doing some things, and then most probably nothing much happened after I left. Similarly, we were trying to do certain things in Mumbai Municipal Corporation. And that time also, unfortunately, we did not have an environment department. So here in Mumbai Port, we started realizing that port is now a very, very inherent part of the city of Mumbai. Though port activity per se on its own doesn't cause much pollution, but the actors working in the port, and especially the ships and vessels at the port, they are the major contributor to the GHG emissions. Then we thought that how should we institutionalize the whole mechanism so that we can at least ensure that after I leave, the process goes on. So we engaged some time back EMC. Fortunately, we were fortunate enough to get a good company to do inventorization of our scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. That job is almost over now.
Recording stopped.
And then we thought about that there is a need to create a full-fledged structure, because we even toyed with the idea of having champions in each of our departments. There is one department called Marine Department, which is in charge of the waters. There is a traffic department, which is in charge of the docks. Then the civil engineering department, the mechanical engineering department, electrical engineering. Everybody does its own job, security department. But somehow or the other, these champions were not coming up
Recording in progress.
to perform the jobs that were being entrusted to them. Mainly it happens in government that you give a tender and that is the tender, yes, everybody takes care of it. But beyond the tender, then everybody forgets. And these are hard work which needs to be done. So in the 150th year of Mumbai Port, which happened in 2023, that we announced the creation of a Center of Excellence on ESG and circularity in port and maritime sector. And then we figured out that how to create an institution for it. Fortunately, we were able to get approvals of our board. And I am told in the last 15-20 years, this was one of the rare Section 8 companies that got created in any of the departments of Ministry of Port Shipping and Waterways. So now it is institutionalized. And what we have done, that all environment related initiatives, including the various environmental compliances that a company has to do, including ports, they will be then put within the Mumbai Port Sustainability Foundation, so that there will be a proper mechanism to take control of all environment related issues. And I believe that many of the organizations which you belong to may be doing similar initiatives, but it's very difficult to have continuity in government, and especially at a time when it is being just said that in shipping, IMO has brought out a mandate that by 2050 we have to achieve net zero. Our country has pledged that they will do net zero by 2070. Our shipping ministry, fortunately, we brought out a document called Maritime India Vision 2030, followed by another document of Maritime Amrit Kal Vision 2047, which brought out a set of guidelines which we need to follow to move towards a path of net zero, though it doesn't specifically talk about net zero. So accordingly, in Mumbai Port, we believe that though 2047 is a time that we will be able to achieve net zero, but most probably we may be able to achieve it much before that, except for the scope 3 part of it, but majorly we will be in a position to do that. As I told you earlier, that maximum carbon footprint is because of the tugs and the vessels that ply in the harbour. There are two types of vessels which are plying in the harbour. One is the vessels which do service for us, and second is those vessels which are plying in the harbour and they are providing services to others, including the passenger as well as boats related to fisheries. They are not providing any service to the port per se, but yes, they are providing service to the society. And they are also plying in our harbours, and they use our waters and use our various infrastructure for that. So that issue at the moment we are not touching. Though we are toying with the idea of doing some experiments for passenger boats, how to do some retrofitting so that we can have reduction. But fishery vessels we are presently not touching at all. But other than that, for other kind of vessels, we are very serious about it. And Mumbai Port also is you can say, the cruise hub of India, because maximum international cruise vessels, they make their first port of call at Mumbai Port, or their last port of call in India at Mumbai Port. And plus we already have a home porting of a cruise boat, and there is a likelihood that in the next 2 to 3 years a couple of more boats will be home porting at Mumbai Port. In case of a cruise vessel, 40% of its greenhouse gas emissions is caused when the boat is on sitting at the port. So one can imagine the amount of emissions that is being caused. So we are almost complete with our studies of providing shore power facility to cruise boats which will come to Mumbai. But the facility will take at least 2 to 2.5 years to get ready. Only about 2.5% of all cruise terminals in the world are presently shore power compliant. So we are not very behind. It's good that we will learn good lessons from those who have failed from their experiments. Certain ports have done it quite long back in Europe, and we are learning the lessons from them. So most probably this thing will be taken care of, because all boats in say next 3 to 4 years time, all cruise boats which will come to Mumbai will be shore power compliant. Presently the boats that come to Mumbai are not that compliant. Plus the present boat which is home porting at Mumbai, the Cordelia, cannot take shore power because it's a very old boat. So it's not possible. Similarly, Mumbai, another kind of vessels which come in larger numbers are the oil tankers at the crude oil jetties, because our 65% of our cargo is oil, chemicals, gas. These tankers now are being at least geared up for taking shore power. So we have done an MOU with DNV, which is that company, a class society which is trying to set standards for shore power for tanker ships across the world. And most probably that area we may be able to cover in next 3 years for providing shore powers to oil tankers or gas tankers. Besides that, through the Indian Port Association, we have done an MOU with Rocky Mountain Institute. It's a think tank based out of Colorado in USA. And we have taken 3-4 subjects to cover with them. And one subject is zero emission trucking, because some experiments have been done in Los Angeles port, because Los Angeles is environmentally extremely vociferous county. The ports there are in all America or Europe are owned by the city councils, and there's a very big mandate on achieving certain standards of air and water pollution. So they have started that. We are trying to learn from their experiments and other experiments worldwide, and several pilots we have already received for various ports across India. All are major ports, means government ports. So there these experiments on zero emission trucking will start now, and hopefully in a year and a half, we may be able to develop a few pilots that can especially reduce greenhouse gas emissions, majorly relating to container carrying trucks, because that is the easiest to do in the first phase. Second, we are also trying to see that how alternate fuels which are being now talked about, which are majorly related to green hydrogen, how those fuels can be handled, stored, bunkered at major ports. So this study needs to be done now, so that at least in a couple of years' time, we would be in a position to start establishing this infrastructure. Because as of now, all the ports in our country, including our government ports, are tuned to mono-fuel culture. It's one type of fuel, everything related to one fuel, and everybody is trained for that. So like in ships, on ships, the ship's crews are being trained for handling multiple fuels. Similarly, at ports also, we have to engage with various experts to ensure that we are in a position to build capacity of our people, as well as make infrastructure in such a way that it is able to handle multiple fuels. Similarly, India is going to be a major producer of green hydrogen. So derivatives of green hydrogen exports may also happen from India in a big way in future. So along with RMI, we are now building processes that to see which major ports would be in a position to have these facilities in place, and so export of green hydrogen derivatives can happen from there. We are also working on developing green shipping corridors, that which will be basically green hydrogen corridors, what we are toying with the idea of coastal corridors, that from within which ports we can undertake such journeys where along the way we are almost having green hydrogen. It's an area where we need to work now so we can see results in 10 years. But it's an area where we have started treading our small steps. So besides that, the marine biodiversity is another area where ports have a lot of footprint on. And this area we will also be touching with the help of our Sustainability Foundation as well. And I think Dr. Rakesh is also involved. We had formed an advisory committee on that in Mumbai Port to see that with some experts as well, that this area gets touched upon, along with the aspect of sea level rise, because that is another challenge which is facing us. And we are engaging with the University of Notre Dame and a couple of Indian institutes to do study at eastern waterfront, that how sea level rise may impact the present infrastructure and what future infrastructure that will get developed at Mumbai shores, and then its connection with our sustainability efforts. We are also trying to do some mangrove conservation here by developing an eco park over 10 acres of land at Sivri with the help of CSR participation from oil companies. So the DPR preparation is rightly on, and we can see that thing sees the light of the day. But overall, I strongly believe that as a forum in AMTOI, because it's all multimodal logistics now which is there, and everybody is interlinked to the other. How we can bring these various actors together with formation of some kind of an institutional mechanisms, so that everybody takes some concrete planning that these are the steps they are going to take or they have to take to ensure that their footprint comes down. And in that, yes, some things can be managed by themselves and they may need some support from the government. So if we can figure out that this is the support that government has to give, then I believe that some plan is possible, because we are finding that under climate change and reducing our emissions, now funding is available from government, plus as well as green finance is another issue that now some companies are taking advantage of. We also in the port sector are planning to do some study on green finance, because these are expenditures on greening of vessels or tugs is a very big expenditure. It's a huge expenditure when we have to entail, but it is in the interest of the environment, and we will be in need of these kind of financial backups as well, so that the end consumer does not feel a pinch in a bigger way, because any small rise in vessel related charges at the port is directly impacting on the prices of the commodity which the consumer pays. So accordingly, we have to see that how that also remains in control. It's a good initiative, Mr. Mehta and AMTOI, that you have taken up on ESG. It needs greater, deeper deliberations, and the ethos of ESG has to be internalized by everybody, because it's easy to say, but very difficult to practice. But I hope that good things will come out of today's deliberations and further deliberations, and I am really fortunate to be part of this brainstorming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. What I think came out loud and clear, besides all the initiatives that you shared with the audience, was the fact that you have given an offer that we were looking for, and that is that AMTOI and the port authorities should come together, right? Yes, and the foundation should come together and discuss things that can be done Some by them, some by you, and some by us, as we said. And that's a good initiative, good to start with, a good beginning. Friends, we move on to another very talented human being who I have personally known for many, many years. And whenever I get stuck with something, ESG is three small alphabets. But when you actually go down to look at it, it means a lot. It has a much more depth than it just portrays. So sometimes being a new thing, I get stuck, and I always resort to this man who's, as I said, a walking, talking encyclopedia on environment, and that is none other than Rakesh Kumar. So I'm going to introduce him. His introduction is about a couple of pages long, and I've tried to reduce it as much as I can. Dr. Kumar is currently president of Society of Indoor Air after completing his tenure at CSIR headquarters as OSD and mission director for coordination of National Research Hub for Carbon Capture, Storage and Use. He obtained his MTech in Environmental Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay, and later accomplished PhD in Environmental Engineering while at CSIR Neeri. He was Chief Scientist and Head of CSIR Neeri, Mumbai Zone Coastal Center, before serving as Director of CSIR Neeri during 2016-2021. He has experience in all major fields of environment science, engineering, especially air pollution control and management, urban air quality monitoring, emission inventory and modeling, environmental impact assessment, environmental audit, climate change, and health. Dr. Kumar has given a notable contribution in developing technologies for reuse and recycle of domestic and industrial wastewater, which brought a paradigm shift in the country. His efforts have been for upliftment and application of science and technology for a suitable and sustainable development. He has received many, many awards, 9 major awards. He has received the Commonwealth Commission Award in UK in 1994, the Environmental Leadership Award by US Asia Environmental Partnership and USAID for the year 2005, for outstanding contribution in improving quality of life for the population of Asia. He has been given an award for the largest number of technology transfers for low-cost wastewater treatment in the year 2012. He has received the Vasvik Award in 2012. Then he has received the He or She Think of Ecology Award in 2015. In 2020, he received the Green Excellence Award in Environment Protection category for providing innovative solutions of wastewater treatment. Ladies and gentlemen, hold your breath. Dr. Rakesh Kumar has 18 patents on pollution control devices, including 3 international patents, and published more than 170 papers in national and international journals and 90 papers in national and international conferences. Ladies and gentlemen, bring your hands together to welcome Rakesh Kumar, Dr. Rakesh Kumar. Can we have his presentations, please?
Thank you. You spoke longer than I am going to speak. So thank you, Neville. It's always pleasure to be anything that you organize. And as usual, without PPT, I feel, yes, that would be great. So for people from our background, the kind of work that I do, we feel more complete when PPTs are there. People like Rajiv ji, he is extempore everywhere. He can possibly speak for a longer period and make sense, but we need some aid. So what I'm going to do in another 15 minutes to give you a glimpse of ESG, which every one of you know, but bit of inputs there, and also bring a context of climate change, why this whole thing started happening. one of the reason why I wanted to show you few things about climate is because it's emanating from the international debate and discussion. So I was in the Indian team of negotiating, climate change parameters. So I got a first-hand glimpse of what actually happens. So we'll show you some of those, and at the end we will discuss if there is anything else to be discussed. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So let's go to next. Yeah. No changed. Yeah, so if you see this word IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change, SPM is summary for policy making, because the climate change documents, when it is created by IPCC, some of them are 600 pages, some of them 1800 pages, and there will be 3 volumes, more than 3,000, 4,000 scientists involved. So it's very difficult for any comprehensive understanding. So what is done is, at the end of the whole exercise of science, people sit together to bring a document which some policymakers can adopt, and that is what is called SPM. And that is where I was involved as a technical expert out of this about 12 experts sitting from the India side, and that's what we understood what happens in various sectors. So I'll not go into details, but I'll look at only the transport sector. Can we go to next? So look, if you look at transport sector alone, and I'm only talking about the demand side, where basically it means that all of us, when we are using this sector, what actually happens. Now, one of the very interesting thing happens is that we have a current scenario data, and after that we do a model exercise to, okay, if we continue in the similar way, what will happen, and if we do something better, then what is likely to happen. Of course, there are worst case scenarios as well which are generated. So if you see that when we are talking about 1.5 degrees C, the target that everyone is talking about, we are saying with no or limited overshoot model scenario, global transport CO2 emission can reduce by 40 to 68, should reduce by 40 to 68% by 2050 with respect to 2020. If we are wanting to meet 1.5 degree, right? So that's the model simulation people do to understand. Similarly, when we want to do it for 2 degrees centigrade, right, there we need to be reducing between 14 to 44 degree by 2050, and when we compare with 2020. What actually it means is the set of people who are sitting here, transport sector, when I say transport, it means anything relating to transport, which is road, shipping, aviation, everything together. And that's where we have to start thinking. And if you see, these are the statements which are negotiated by all countries together, and then in this case people also discuss that what happens to developing countries. Like, you can make some statement for developed countries, but what do we do? So that is where it says at the bottom, if you see, technology transfer and financing can support developing countries leapfrogging or transmitting to low emission transport systems. So that's the commitment which is given. So many times you will see that Indian politicians will make statement, since you are not giving us technology, which you are not giving money, and therefore how we will meet. Actually, it's your responsibility that you emitted CO2 for such a long period, and now you are blaming us to do things. So it's not a hollow thing, it's a negotiated position, right? And that is where the government is absolutely right. But on the other side, we cannot be sitting and negotiating and saying that you all were responsible and therefore we can continue to emit or continue to do what we are doing. So India, in a right way, has taken leadership, and which is a very positive thing, that many sectors we have taken steps to reduce things compared to many other countries. And that's something which one should be proud of. There are many other countries who are still struggling to understand and what steps to be taken. Can we go to next? So here, if you see, this is a very famous table of IPCC, that summary of policymakers document, which actually says the approximate cost of meeting certain energy goals. So if you see, wind energy has got the lowest cost. The blue is the lowest cost, and as you go on the other side, it becomes darker, it is expensive. So wind, solar, bioelectricity, hydropower, and as you go down below, you will find that less and less effectiveness is there. The longer the longer the parameter that you see, it actually means we have higher potential to mitigate our greenhouse gases in a shorter period as well as less cost. Right, and that is a cue for all of us to understand that if it is being said, this is a summary of almost like 1,000 plus research papers which must have been published by various researchers across. So IPCC on its own doesn't do any research, frankly speaking. It just collates all that information and then that does it. Next. Similarly, if you see, 2030 time frame, we are also talking about fuel efficient light duty vehicles, electric duty vehicles, and the series of these options which are there. The one which you see at the bottom, the biofuels. Biofuels are nothing but like so-called bio CNG that we are talking, or people are also talking about. Just now we talked about green hydrogen if it comes from the biological route. So all of these will actually become a future as we move forward in the whole process of meeting climate goals, and then ESG comes in automatically. Next. So these are so you don't need to worry about too much about this graph. What it actually says is why we are discussing about 2030. Prime Minister also says, and many other people will also say 2030, although we have a commitment of 2070 to meet net zero. But the issue is that 2070 is too far away, and if you see the model scenario, we will have a separate lecture on that, that if we don't do certain things by 2030, we will not be able to meet that 1.5 degree centigrade target. So the tipping point for us is 2030, and that is where everything needs to be counted. So we have counted our CO2 very well, but we haven't counted other greenhouse gases, which are, we call it there's other parameters, for example. So what you see here are actually short-lived climate pollutant, SCLP that is called, and it is a data only for IGP, that is Indo-Gangetic Plain. And here you will see that transport sector, although looks in terms of pie chart, the smaller portion, but it has a significant impact. As a growing country, we have to depend on transportation sector a lot if population has to survive and economy has to survive. Next one. Can you go to next? So this is a chart which I have picked up from McKinsey report. It primarily tells you where the transport sector is in terms of total freight that we talk about. It gives a number. It is not important that we get worried about these numbers. What is important here is that in the domain of what we do, which freight I am using and where I can make a difference. So it's not individual, it is combination. Some companies may be using multiple modals, as Rajiv ji also said. Some of them just use one fuel. There are other people who use multiple fuels as such. So this is an example which locally also available. If you go to Chandrapur, which is a place where a lot of coal is available, cheaper, and you will assume that they'll primarily be using coal, but if you do a survey of household, you will find they use 4 different types of fuel. So coal is used for low quality heating, which is outside because it's polluting. For normal good guest cooking, they'll be using LPG inside. If there is a servant, he'll be using kerosene. So that's the kind of combination which we see everywhere. So even companies could be using the same thing. Next one. So this is something which I wouldn't go in details. I think there is a presentation by a professor who actually is teaching this subject. So he'll come later. But what primarily it is saying is that environment is something which we were doing it any which way. And a lot of industry people do ask me, isn't it that we were doing air pollution control under Air Act? Then we were doing water pollution, in 1974, that was Water Act, and then 1986 we got Environment Umbrella Act 1986, and after that now we have plethora of rules. So till 1986, India had only 2 acts: Air Act and Water Act. Now we have more than 100. Some of them are acts, some of them are rules, some of them are guidelines. So that is where the problem comes in. That if someone has to do a compliance of environment related parameters, it's not good enough to know certain acts and do it. So we must do something which can be audited, which could be counted, and which could be verified. And so it's not good enough to say I have planted 10 trees and therefore I'm doing great. We must say these trees for what? Why did you do it? It was under compliance, or it was just like you did a benevolent act. So similarly, people also realized that the social aspect, which was interconnected, was never connected with environment. And if you see all the documents which emerged in our country and elsewhere as well, environment is health related primarily. All environment rules are based on the health parameters. So health is for what? Society. And if society is not counted, you are actually excluding the bigger chunk of people. And finally, each of these two together, if it is not linked with governance, who does, who reports, how it is done, then we have missed out the third big parameters. So there are many details of it. BSc has come out with multiple documents, which is great to see and very well written. There are always some people who will say, we can do better. But I'm saying, this is the starting point and we have done a great job. Next one. These are some of the parameters here. So I'll again skip this. It's also there on the summary of that in the pamphlet which is given to everyone, which Dr. Neville has done a great job. So what primarily it actually talks about is, and so I'll now talk about environment and social. See some of the governance issues which normally people like us don't talk about, right? And we suffer from all of these governance issues later on. So if you see one of them, which says, business ethics. Now, business ethics, if you take operation of, say, sewage treatment plant or a wastewater treatment plant, primarily the person who is responsible in an industry, and I'm not talking about logistic industry, but any other industry, is the person who is a safety person. So safety person is said that you have to look at environment, and what he does is that look after, meaning anyone who comes from pollution control board has to be looked after, right? So the ethics part of it becomes that who should be hiring, what kind of person you should be hiring for that purpose. And I remember one of my senior colleague from IIT Bombay, he joined Asian Paints, and I am taking the name of the company. He refused to budge. He said, when I'm complying each and everything, I will not entertain whoever comes. Right? So he had a hard time convincing his board members, saying that Diwali mein kuch to gift dena chahiye, kuch to aur hona chahiye. He said, no, I am doing everything great. After Diwali, if there is need to give something, that is a different thing altogether. So what happens is this business ethics of managing environment led to a point that the people who are being hired for environment compliance were the people who were not having any ethics connected to it. So it's just that we want to manage. And therefore, this interconnectivity of ESG was important. And I find that this whoever did first time thinking did a great job of putting it all together. So if we come to the sector that we are wanting to talk about, key components of green logistics which are being discussed across the world primarily looks at fuel efficiency and alternative fuels. Right now, it is electric vehicles, biofuels, hybrid technology, but it could be anything as of now. What is not mostly talked about is that locally there are certain areas where people also use hydropower. There are people who can use their own native, some material which can be used for energy generation that can also be used. So second one is supply chain optimization. And that's a big area where I find that very few companies are working, and I'll share some examples later on. And it is an area where you need mathematician, and I think Devans is the person who would be doing this kind of work. When you look at optimization processes, you are talking about millions of transport routes which are being there, different fuel, different efficiency, different countries with different destination. You cannot do it manually. That's era of manual adjustment, and discussion is over. Green warehousing, a lot of buildings which are being now green warehousing which are being done in India, they were actually exempted for environmental clearance till date. Just a recent court ruling has come, I think Madras High Court, saying that nothing doing, all of these are also supposed to go and take environmental clearance, which is a big shift. Earlier, we all felt that warehousing is a green activity, the way we felt IT sector is a green sector. From environmental clearance, what people actually meant was that you get troubled. You have to go and take clearance, and you have to meet some people. But what is coming here is some of these facilities are so big, and their energy footprint is huge. So none of these IT companies, for example, and this warehousing can say that they are green. So that is part of it. Packaging waste reduction is big. Again, there's a lot of innovation happening. If you do a little bit of digging, you'll find that people are doing a lot of research to understand packaging in a very different way. Which we give an example for green packaging is like cone ice cream. You eat the ice cream as well as the package, right? So what is that we can do in that domain? And then of course integrating all of it. Next one. So people are now talking about green technology in logistics. So innovation in electric and autonomous vehicles, which we have seen, drones, people have talked about, how effective they are, safety aspects, everything else comes in. IoT and big data, I already talked about, where people are now looking at sensors. And then sensors, it is earlier we used to feel that sensors are very expensive, very difficult to manage, but now there are devices which are based on MEMS. There are microchips basically, and they are as cheap as 2 rupees, 1.5 rupees, depending upon which kind of sensor we are talking about. So now data can come more easily, and we can put them together. Green infrastructure, as I said, when we are talking about warehouses, looking at smart grids and where we can do it. There is a company called Green Power, something in again California, which was into this game of green energy way back. I'm talking about 30 years back. So what they were doing is they were generating solar electricity in one state, but selling it in the New York City. In California, they were generating, but selling there. So again, that's something which we implement in India also, this REC's thing. So what is being done is that there is no need that you should be doing all of it in one single place. One can also do a smart management, tying up with the right set of people and organization, and get the green infrastructure. So in ESG, basically all of these together, if we become transparent in our energy use or material use, chances are that we can do a better job. Some of the regulation and market trends are, if you see, global ESG standards have come in. There are many things which many of us are aware, like GRS standards, CDP, sustainability reporting, new climate related norms, TNFD and TCFD is being discussed. Basically, climate and nature is also coming into the parameters to assess. We had only water and air to be assessed, which was much easier. We knew how to measure it. But now the moment you say climate parameters have to be assessed and nature parameters to be assessed, it's a very different ballgame together. And that's where you need experts who can put all of this together. And that's why, since the landscape is changing, some people may feel frustrated. Look, every day there is something new which is coming up, and how do we deal with it? Shivam is the one which we'll hear from the team here. But it's like we have to be prepared. How come the other countries are prepared and we are not? And that's why we keep struggling all over the place. CSR, we have already done a great job in our country, and Government of India also keeps re-looking at how CSR is functioning, not functioning. And we haven't seen too much of the last point here, consumer demand for ESG transparency in India. But in other countries, people have seen that some of the entities who are doing a good job of ESG transparency, their share prices are doing better. Their company is viewed as a good company. Next one. So these leading companies who are implementing ESG in logistics are DHL's Go Green program. All of you must have, since you all are from this field, you would know. UPS carbon neutral shipping is another company which is taking lead into it. Amazon has done this climate pledge where it's saying we are committing to net zero carbon electric delivery vehicles and renewable energy centers under ESG framework. So many companies have taken lead, and I'll give you an example of what all continents are doing. Next one. So if you see North America, few examples. In road freight, Amazon has committed to deploying 100,000 electric delivery vans. PepsiCo has begun using Tesla semi-electric trucks. In warehousing, Walmart Canada has built sustainable grocery distribution centers. So that's the few examples from North America. Next one. In Europe, you see Maersk has transitioning to its fleet to run on green methanol with 26 vessels commissioned for this by 2025. That's their commitment. In warehousing, GLS operates self-sufficient warehouse in Essen, Germany. Air Freight, Port of Los Angeles, which Rajiv was also talking about. So there's a whole lot of activity in Europe. In fact, Europe is taking much more lead in this sector. Next one. In Asia, we have seen bigger examples, mostly from China. In rail freight, they are expanding its electric freight train network, reducing emissions. CMS CGM, major French shipping company, is testing bioliquefied natural gas, which we are also doing in our country, for in Asian waters. Next one. Next. Yeah. So in Africa, also you see that some logistic companies have started looking at road freight primarily using electric trucks. In ocean freight, then port decarbonization is being attempted, port of Mombasa. So some of these countries and the sectors which have actually taken a lead into this. Next. In South America, you see Argentina is modernizing all rail infrastructure. We haven't yet given much importance to rail infrastructure in our country for freight from ESG point of view. The rest of the other, of course, we do. And similarly for road freight, electrification of fleets by Brazil is being seen as a new game altogether. Next. In Oceania, you have again Qantas doing in air freight. Australia Post is implementing solar power logistics centers for training electric trucks. So if you see, almost all part of the world is looking at this sector as a sector of change, frankly speaking. So what are the obstacles in ESG adoption when we talk about the sector that we are dealing with? So it does require high initial investment in green technology and infrastructure. Lack of infrastructure for electric hydrogen powered vehicles. We talked about hydrogen a lot in our country, and I'm sure in coming years we will see some good progress in that. Difficulty in maintaining governance transparency across global supply chains. So one country does good, but other countries not doing if you are partnering with other countries in terms of transparency. And then of course fair labor practices, because many times when you do automation you lay off people, and then that is where something else happens. Next one. So future of ESG sustainable logistics is you can see growth in electric and hydrogen powered trucks, which also need a lot of policy push from the government. Circular supply chains, which basically needs reuse, refurbishing and recycling as part of ESG framework. Continued innovation in AI, robotics and automation for efficiency and sustainability, and expansion of carbon neutral shipping options with environment, climate and nature certification. So environment certification we are in place, but nature and climate is something which is still being debated and discussed across the world. Yeah. So finally, please go on clicking. The global shift towards decarbonizing logistics from electric fleets and renewable energy in warehouse to sustainable fuels in shipping and aviation is taking place much faster. So which is a good sign. Each continent is taking steps tailored to its unique challenges and opportunities. And India has been taking many steps in right direction. May the speed increase. That's what is our desire in this case. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rakeshji. Very, very insightful presentation. What came out was when we talk about ESG, it's not just the dais who needs to work on. We all are involved in it. So it's like, we throwing litter on the roads and expressing to the BMC, you got to clean it. You got to clean my mess type of thing. The mess is created by us, but you need somebody else to create and clean the mess. And that's not going to work anymore. We are in this game together. And that's why sometimes we overlook the S and G. And that's very important. That's whenever I go to companies and I talk about it. I mean, environment, yes, we have a lot of knowledge on it, but somehow or the other, the S and G is put under the carpet, and that's not right, because S and G is equally important if you want E to be sustainable and meet with success. So that's what came out where I was concerned. So now we go on. We have a deadline, so we have to go on quickly. We have two very eminent speakers from PwC. The first one is Mr. Anurag Sehgal, Managing Director of Pricewaterhouse and Company, and he is an ex-IRS person. I'll introduce you to him very shortly. He has a huge biodata of achievements. After having spent 15 years in the Indian Revenue Service, Customs and Indirect Taxes, he has extensive experience in policy analysis, legal matters, and execution in the government, with experience in India's Ministry of Finance as well as Ministry of Commerce. At India's Ministry of Finance, that's the Tax Research Unit, Anurag's preparatory work for the introduction of historic goods and service tax in the country, integrating India as a market, has given him deep insights in India's taxation infrastructure. He has also been instrumental in correcting structural anomalies in tax rates during 3 budgets making exercises from 2015 to 2017. More recently, Anurag has been associated with India's Ministry of Commerce. He has represented India in various international negotiations on trade tariffs and customs issues, including in India's ongoing FTA negotiations with the European Union, EFTA, and the UK. Anurag also brings a rich experience on the ground execution of policies relating to trade facilitation, compliance, and enforcement, having served at Delhi Customs and as a tax investigator in Gujarat. Anurag has a postgraduate degree in business laws from the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, and bachelor's degree in electronics engineering. He has also studied customs and business administration at Kukum University, Seoul, under the aegis of the World Customs Organization. He has recently pursued an advanced master's in international trade law from the World Trade Institute, Switzerland. I wish I had the patience to study so much and get so many degrees. We also have his colleague, Pritesh, who is also director, and he leads the climate initiative at PwC. And I'll briefly introduce Pritesh also. Pritesh is a director with Sustainability and Climate Change team at PwC India. He has more than 12 years of experience working in areas of carbon markets, climate finance, climate change mitigation, NDC assessments, GHG accounting, and MRV development. Pritesh was also a key team member of an engagement assessing the impact of carbon border adjustment mechanism, that is CBAM, that we're going to have a presentation on Indian industries, where he developed cost implications of EU's carbon tax and provided board recommendations on the alignment of the Indian carbon market with EU's mechanism. Pritesh is currently supporting the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Government of India, in the development and implementation of the national carbon market in India as a key team member. As he's currently working on the development of the policy documents and developing the policy and regulatory framework for the proposed carbon market. This includes the revision of existing policies like PAT and REC in line with proposed carbon market, and the developing new documents, including draft resolutions on establishment of carbon market, trading, and related aspect. He's also working on conducting stakeholder engagement sessions with various ministries and relevant stakeholders to discuss and finalize elements of proposed carbon market. May I request you to please welcome them, join your hands to welcome them. And also over to you both for your presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mehta, for generous and kind introduction. And no, I guess it's fine. Yeah, we can. Yeah, you also come here. So, just to begin with, and thanks to Sir, as well as thanks to Dr. Kumar, taking us through ESG and various initiatives which MPT is doing, and various initiatives otherwise Government of India is doing or world over, which are being carried out. But one important, thing which I guess Sir also alluded to is ESG as an ethos we all need to internalize. And frankly, it applies to all of us, all the human beings. And since we love by nature, we love whatever is happening, let it continue. Maybe I can call it inertia. So any major change, brings a disruption. So here in today, for next, I guess, 15 minutes, both of us will be talking about disruption rather than, something which is a growth area. But in any case, this disruption will in itself be bringing a lot of change. Already that change is happening. We are seeing, you saw in the introduction of Pritesh when Dr. Mehta was telling about that India is working on creating a carbon market, and British is actively working on it. So this disruption in itself is bringing lot of gains. There would be short-term effects, long-term effects, but ultimately what needs to be seen is how it affects overall environment, overall governance across the globe, and of course India, how does it get impacted? So, just quickly coming to CBAM, what is CBAM? You can call it essentially EU's new carbon tax, though they don't call it a carbon tax, specifically in trade law context. But why is it a carbon tax? Because as of now, if there are goods exported to any territory, at the point of import, the entry port customs, they charge a customs duty. Now the customs duty has been charged since years, and customs duty's basic premise is to have certain kind of protection created for the domestic manufacturers. Now this protection could be higher in numbers, higher in percentage, could be lesser, but that protection which is created is bound by WTO rules. So you cannot have more protection than what you have committed to World Trade Organization. Now, this is all in trade law and everything. But through carbon tax or through CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, what essentially is happening is, depending on the embedded emission in your product, say a steel product from India is exported to EU, depending on the embedded emission in that steel consignment, your product will attract a carbon levy. Now that carbon levy is not to be paid to customs, but rather your importer will have to purchase certain certificates upfront, and those certificates will be debited basis the content of carbon in the imported product. So clearly, if the content of carbon in the imported product is less, you have to debit less certificates, and the certificates you have purchased, upfront, they can continue for longer period. So it is a cost in the hands of importer. And as we all see, any cost in the hands of importer would like to negotiate that cost with the exporter concerned, maybe with the logistics service provider also, and that is why the today's logistics sector may come into picture. So essentially, this is what CBAM is all about, that a tax or a levy related to the emitted carbon content in the imported product in EU is being levied. And what EU is doing is, essentially, they are mirroring EU's ETS. EU had an emission trading system since past 15 years now. So they are essentially mirroring it to their imports. So CBAM in nutshell applies to certain select sectors as of now. Slowly it will expand. It applies to iron and steel, fertilizer, aluminium, and electricity and certain select products. Slowly it will definitely expand. As of now, only the first phase is going on, wherein you report the embedded emission. The carbon levy will come into picture in the second phase, which will begin in January 26. More important thing is non-compliance, which has been built in the CBAM regulation. So if you see here, the last bullet, penalties up to Euro 50 per ton of unreported carbon emissions are what is expected. For phase 2, that is January 26 onwards, you may have another implementing regulation and this may evolve. But having said that, what this says is EU has implemented a regulation, linked it with environment. Of course, there is a greater disruption which will be caused to imports into the EU, domestic manufacturers within the EU, consumers within the EU. Imagine consumers within the EU who are getting a auto car, from BMW made in Germany, sourced at X price. That price rises to X plus 1 simply because the steel for that car is imported from China and India, and now you have a carbon levy associated with that steel. Of course, the cost of car manufacturing will go up. So it is going to cause a great disruption for people sitting in EU. But so far, since EU is a large consumption area, large consuming market, so for the exporters around the globe, India is clearly, largely affected by the exports of iron and steel and aluminium. You can go to the next slide. And I'll be, a bit quick on in the coming slides. Maybe post this presentation, we will be happy to take questions. You can go back to that slide. So, on an overview of CBAM goods, I already mentioned, these 6 CBAM broad categories are already included. India, iron and steel, and aluminium. These 2 sectors, India is one of the top exporters to EU. So, we are clearly affected. In fact, just to give you an insight, when we started working on as a trade lawyer and as a ESG practitioner, Pritesh and I, and we have created a specific CBAM platform from wherein different competencies work together in CBAM related awareness. When we started working on this, we were very concerned as to how Indian suppliers will be, they'll report their embedded emission, because we were concerned as even if, do they have mechanisms to report? But would you believe that most of Indian suppliers are reporting their embedded emissions? They may not be correct, they may be inaccurate, but the idea is Indian suppliers are way ahead. And I've been told by my other network colleagues, Indian suppliers are way ahead than many exporting country suppliers in reporting their embedded emission to their importers concerned. So yes, we are working towards it. It will take some time. Internal mechanisms need to be created, but these 2 products especially, Indian suppliers have started working. You want to explain direct and indirect emissions?
Okay, so before getting on direct and indirect emissions, so just want to mention the sectors that are being covered in phase 1 of CBAM. That is from 2023 to 26. So we are covering iron, steel, electricity, fertilizers, cement, chemicals, and aluminium. Electricity obviously is not applicable because we are not supplying electricity to the European Union, but the other sectors, organizations within the other sectors in India exporting to EU will be, will be impacted. Now, when you're talking about, emissions, I mean, typically, when we talk about GHG emissions, in organizations, we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. So when in CBAM parlance, we talk about something called embedded emissions. Right? There is no universal method to estimate embedded emissions, but EU for the first time has provided some guidelines. And based on those guidelines, organizations have to come up with a detailed methodology, right, on those guidelines. So essentially, under what EU is saying is that you exporters, have to report direct emissions. Direct emissions is essentially emissions from the process that is followed during, producing something. Direct emissions from that process are direct emissions that you estimate. And then there are indirect emissions. Indirect emissions are essentially emissions from electricity usage for production of that product. And something that we haven't added here, but there's something called precursor emissions. Precursor emissions are also added. So let's say I am an exporter of nuts and bolts made of steel. So I would be buying my steel from, let's say, a integrated steel plant in India, but the steel rods. So I need to add the emissions that go into production of those that steel rod into my emissions. So direct emissions plus indirect emissions plus precursors is what gives you embedded emissions. So while we are kind of reporting our emissions, as Anurag said, we are advanced, but it still poses a bit of a challenge because you have to tweak your emissions estimations methodology. It's a kind of a slightly increased burden, especially if the larger organizations are ahead. The Jindal Steel, the Tata Steel, they're way ahead in this regard. They have systems in place. But when you come to the MSMEs, they will face some challenges. Fortunately, what we see is that there's growing demand for these products within India. They have the domestic market. They are not very dependent on EU at this point in time. So we can, it's not that not that much of an alarming situation at this point in time. But this is going to grow more challenging with the years to come. Next slide, please. So, let's say you are an organization and there is this regulation called CBAM that's come up, and how do you look at it? How do you approach it? First question that you ask is, are the goods of your company directly or indirectly exported to you and are subject to CBAM? That's the first question. If it's a no, great, no current impact, but we would suggest that you continuously, monitor the trends, because the coverage of EU with regard to sectors and goods products is only going to increase. They want to increase the coverage because they have their own targets of, fit for 55, reduce their emissions by 55% by 2030. They're going very aggressive. So you may not be getting covered now, but going forward, you may be covered. So monitor that. Yes, if you are getting impacted, the next question is, are you in a position to provide that data? Are you in the position to calculate embedded emissions in accordance with the provisions of CBAM? If it's a no, please take action. Put the systems in place. Spend the money to to build capacities, to put the systems in place, and also communicate to the people you are exporting to that we are not in a current in a position to estimate the emissions. Let them be informed. And if in case you are able to, you are in a position to calculate embedded emissions, what you do is you start coordinating with your importers and, tell them, provide them with your responses, because the importers, it's a responsibility of the importer to inform the regulator in the European Union what the embedded emissions are. So communicate to them. So, and, if you're doing that, your company is well placed with regard to, responding to CBAM. Next, please. This is how the process in European Union works. Who are the key actors? As I said, it's a responsibility of the importer to kind of to provide data to the regulator there. So what the importer is going to do is, importer at a certain point is going to ask the exporter, that is the entity in India or a country like India, to provide what the embedded emissions are. At this point in time, you don't need to get your emissions verified by a third party, but post 2026, entities in India will be asked to get their GHG emissions verified, which is a bit of a greater, compliance requirement, which companies have to spend a little more. That is one. And then once the importer will have to pass on the data to the customs authority there. Customs authority will give it to the European Commission. The European Commission will request the importer for the data, the quarterly reports. The importer will ask the exporter to provide the quarterly reports. And based on these quarterly reports, the CBAM levy will be, will be kind of, imposed on the, what you're exporting from India. Slightly more complex than that. I'm just cutting the, keeping it short so that, for time. Next slide, please. Now, again, we are talking about, what needs to be done by exporters. We are here in the logistics sector. We are here in the shipping sector. So we'll be dealing with a lot of these exporters. So what is it that the exporters need to keep in mind? These are, again, some of the areas that, we have already covered, in terms of what are the products to be covered, what are the, what are the processes to follow, what is the information to be collated for calculating embedded emissions, potentially establishing a CBAM organization, you need to have it is recommended that within your, in your organization, you have a CBAM department, the department that monitors, that takes care of these processes. Prepare yourself. We are in a transitional phase. So you need to start working towards, the post 26, you have the transitional phase ends, and you have the phase when the CBAM levy is going to kick in. That's when it's going to bite. So are you prepared for that? So I'll just pass it on to Anurag to take this forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Pritish. So, if you see CBAM organization is mentioned there. So, I've been interacting with many businesses on CBAM and what to do and what not to do. Many are manufacturing setups. Of course, in iron and steel, you would be aware that there are many tier 2 exporters from India to the EU. So, I actually give them our example that, CBAM was one thing wherein different units, we call it different subunits within PwC. We came together, created a platform approach. So economics wing, customs and trade wing, ESG wing, and supply chain wing. We work together on CBAM because all of these get affected. In fact, in customs and trade, we have logistics wing also working together. So the same thing I keep on telling businesses, whether your product is included now or whether it will be included in the future. For example, organic chemicals and plastics will soon get included because they were there in the CBAM draft regulation but couldn't find place in final regulation because of Eastern European countries' opposition. So you should have a CBAM organization because your business team will get affected, your trade and logistics team will get affected, your ESG team will get affected, your market negotiating team will get affected. And many a times companies have different sections for these different roles, and these sections may not be talking to each other. So we always advise that please have a CBAM organization because this is something here to stay. Like ESG is here to stay, disrupt our lives, and maybe rightfully, ESG associated taxes are also here to stay, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of self-interest of the countries, because then you get to impose a non-tariff barrier on imports. So like UK has come out with their CBAM draft regulation now. That will also soon be a reality. Slowly you will find most of the developed countries who do not have enough water. So in trade law, we say water means capacity to increase tariffs. India has considerable water. India can increase tariffs, double its tariffs, average MFN, but some of these countries don't have tariffs. They may be more, and who have taken, hard targets under Paris Agreement, they may be more inclined to go for something like this. So it is always beneficial for any organization to create a CBAM organization for awareness purpose and for action purpose if required. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So herein, I guess, since we are talking about logistics sector, potential impact, broadly divided into 4 categories. There could be other associated impacts also, which may be important. And one of the most important, impact is related to data assurance, because when businesses are passing on information to importers to calculate the embedded emission, there is a prescribed regulation, a template has been provided. You calculate the embedded emission, you share. Now, sometimes the information can be categorized as a business sensitive information. Now, as of now, of course, logistics sector related emissions are not included. Be mindful that going forward, it could also picture in, Pritish, you may highlight when you mentioned, maybe investment in green technologies. But data assurance is something which is very much essential in any CBAM related, transaction between an exporter and an importer. Now, in normal customs parlance or normal shipping routine, many of these, I would not say bill of entry, of course, entry bill is filed by the importer, but many of the data which is captured by a logistics firm or which is captured by a shipping agency, also gets reported to the importing customs authorities. Therein, if some data which is not to be shared but is shared, and somehow the logistics agencies are involved, a risk is associated, which logistics agencies need to be very much cautious of. Supply chain reconfiguration, in fact, I will broadly term it as price negotiations based reconfiguration. If CBAM is there and landing cost, I'll just give an example. Say there is a major steel company and there is a major steel company in Korea which is supplying certain products to EU at at Euro 100 price. The same products are being supplied by India at Euro 80 price. And Indian companies, of course, more price competitive, so has larger share of the EU market. Tomorrow, if that has less embedded carbon, Indian company has more embedded carbon, and after applying CBAM levies, both go to 110 euros. Then the competition sphere may change. They may want to buy more from the Korean company and less from the Indian company. And ultimately, in logistics sector, the transport routes are all connected to how much trade is being generated in a particular route. If the trade generation loses stream, say Indian trade towards EU and say UK and say other developed countries loses stream in some of the sectors, and goods are diverted to say newer markets like Africa or in southern hemisphere, of course supply chain reconfiguration may happen. Other thing which may happen is if there are increased cost in the existing markets wherein you are supplying as of now, and increased costs are being negotiated between EU importer and an Indian exporter, maybe the price burden would be some price burden may be forced on the logistics operators also. So, logistics operator in the past, we have seen that, in certain, because of certain pandemic or certain blockages, Suez Canal blockage and all, logistic costs have risen. In fact, in past few years, if you talk to anyone in the business, they'll say that logistics costs have risen. But this may also lead to, again, renegotiation of logistics costs. So supply chain reconfiguration is something which upfront, even though logistics sector related emissions doesn't get covered in CBAM, which upfront will happen. Investment in green technologies you want to highlight?
Yeah. So one more thing to point out that we would like to point out is, CBAM has been created to mimic the EU ETS, the European Union Emission Trading Scheme. And European Union Emission Trading Scheme, I think earlier this year or sometime late last year, decided to cover maritime transport. Right. So at some point, it's going to cover maritime. It's going to, cover CBAM will also cover maritime transport, maybe sometime post 2034. So it's important that we prepare ourselves, invest in green technologies. I think our previous speaker, sir, that was a very detailed presentation on all the kind of decarbonization measures that can be implemented in the logistics sector. I think it's important that, those measures, whether they are, switching to fuel switch, switching from the conventional fossil fuel based fuels to green hydrogen or other biomass related fuels, energy efficiency methods, going for carbon capture, utilization, sequestration methods, or maybe even think of offsetting emissions through investment in carbon projects, right? So it's important that we take steps towards slowly decarbonizing. As sir also mentioned earlier that these are expensive. A lot of finance is required. Green financing is required. But all the stakeholders involved need to work together towards moving the needle towards greening the logistics sector.
So thanks, Pradesh. In fact, CBAM, and that is what our experience has been interacting with businesses. As of now, CBAM carries more of a compliance cost, and that is acting as a biggest hurdle to some of the tier 2 exporters, creating those competencies. Slowly going forward, if those competencies are created or internalized within the existing teams, many of these investments will become a norm, because slowly, not only CBAM, there are many other commitments, regulations which will push investments in green technologies. Fourth point, having said that, is the same point I covered in second, that if CBAM related penalties are levied, of course a business negotiation means that you also share a burden, or that may happen. So that also may happen and impact logistics sector. Maybe next slide. Now, this is what can be done. How can businesses prepare for CBAM, especially for the businesses which are already covered, the sectors which are already covered under CBAM. First, they need to know how the CBAM is going to impact them, and many of the businesses are working on carrying out an impact analysis. We also supported one Government of India think tank in carrying out impact analysis. Of course, the report was only for sole consumption of theirs. But the other more important thing is, and I was talking about the compliance related cost. If you already have a compliance system for ESG in place, of course, only an incremental cost is involved, because you need to train them to have the embedded emission calculations as per the EU regulation. But if you don't have that, this cost is even greater, and that is why where Government of India is and should also be concerned as far as monitoring, measuring, and reporting requirements are there. But this has to be done, because you have to comply. This is like tax compliance cost, which even if taxation becomes simpler, more paperless, more simplified, more easy, trade facilitative, then also some compliance cost remains. Policy advocacy, why do we advertise? Because carbon credit trading scheme, that is carbon market, is being created by Government of India. So businesses should participate in larger numbers, just to raise their concerns and how Indian carbon market should shape out. So that, I guess, everyone should do who is going to be concerned about this. Decarbonization roadmap, something which we discussed, something which Dr. Kumar also mentioned, that this is a long-term strategy. Everyone has to work towards it. I guess that's it on CBAM from our side. Happy to have any questions.
I have a quick question. Are we taking online questions?
Yeah, sure. But I will have to leave because I have so maybe Pritish will.
Thank you, Anurag, for coming over here. Since you're leaving, may I ask Vivek to please give him a small token of our appreciation for spending his time and experience with us.
Give it. The question was how, because we are represented from the transport sector. So, of course, they have to be partners with the exporters. And already people sitting here are service providers to the companies that you mentioned, specifically in terms of chemicals and steel. I'm sure everybody here is some way directly or indirectly involved in transportation of those commodities internationally and specifically to the European Union. What is the role they can specifically play in, if you can, although you mentioned in terms of declaration, compliances, etc. So, any specific steps they can take in terms of, in the next 2 years, by 2026, the is going to be more stricter, I guess. So, immediate actions that can be taken.
I guess as of now, the more implications are on exporter and the importer concern. So any immediate steps, what they should take, so of course, one is investment in green technologies. Second and more important is, I guess I had mentioned that point but didn't detail it. If you can, collate, or you can have a broad shipping routes wherein you can collate the traffic. I don't know how is it called in logistics language, but you have more traffic collated, you have bigger fleets generated. The reason is why I'm saying this is logistics cost reduction is very important. My logistics team member would have been here. He would have detailed on this, how logistics costs can be reduced, because going forward, we are very sure that CBAM related cost implications the push will also come to logistics sector to share some burden.
Exactly.
So if you generate efficiency in logistics cost, maybe the logistics sector will be able to bear some of this push. Otherwise, if efficiencies in terms of cost are not generated and logistics sector is just passing on the cost, maybe that efficiency will not kick in, and those who are efficient will get more traffic.
So efficiency has to be achieved at a country level, because logistics as partners for the manufacturing together have to reduce the overall cost of the product so that you're competitive in the international markets, I guess.
Absolutely. At the country level as well as at the company level.
Individual level.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, why don't you do the shows? Yeah. I think
So, as a token of good wishes from us, Anurag, thank you for being here.
Come,
Why don't you
come,
come in the
Anurag,
front and let's have a photograph together. Thank you. Pritesh, we'll give you a little later. Friends, we are running short of time. We are running late, so I'll go very quickly, and we're going to go through the introductions very briefly. Now we have Mr. Dr. R.D. Tripathi, who is going to give us a presentation. Dr. R.D. Tripathi is a doctorate from Banaras Hindu University in the field of air pollution, has more than 30 years of experience in managing various aspects of environmental, social, and economic sustainability in various roles under public and private sectors. He has also written a book on environmental auditing. Since 2011, he is an Indian member in Environmental Commission of PIANIC, a global network of professionals working for waterborne transport. He has worked as senior environmental scientist, port operator, ship operator, inland vessel regulator, etc., and has been a member in various committees. Currently, he is taking sustainability initiatives forward as CEO of Mumbai Port Sustainability Foundation and Center of Excellence in ESG and Circularity under the guidance of Shri Rajiv Jalota ji. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Tripathi.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Since my chairman has already briefed almost all the aspects, if you feel, then I can run a presentation. Otherwise, on the initiative, whatever has been taken by Mumbai Port, but I feel because time is less, I will come directly to the ESG part. And we have established a Center of Excellence on ESG, and ESG. It's a very good and very smart word, having lot of implications and lot of complexities in analysis and in the larger business implication. So I have certain points, indicators, which I would just like to discuss here. We have already discussed before with Dr. Mehta when I was invited here. I was saying, since 15 minutes you are giving time, within 15 minutes what I will say about ESG. Then he said we will have a separate discussion and separate specific workshop or something, especially on ESG, how to deal, how to approach, what are the different components, how to analyze, and then what organization, even in transport sector, transport is a wide, huge sector where every company has got its uniqueness. Some deals in one or two modes, some deals in part of the mode, some deals in multiple mode, then different. And then the commodities. Every transport of every commodity has got different implications. Environmental, social, as well as the governance aspect is not coming in there, because governance basically And why I was just seeing the environment side, lot of discussions. Also, I am also from environment basic background, but fortunately, I have been working for the workers and uh, worker company laws and the labor laws, labor law implementation. Then those things have helped me to understand what are the issues are coming for the governance part and how the governance sometimes small when we go big grow big, sometimes we forget the basics or the you can say it is just coming to my mind Lehman Brothers in 2008. Before that, nobody might have thought of what went wrong. And why I have said this, because this was the time when that organization name I'm missing, but UN, on the invite of UN, basically the uh, banking sector and non-financial banking sector, they developed a indices that to quantify what type of loaning or what type of investments and sanctions this may create problem. It was done in 2001 to 2002, I think something. In 2004, it was again re-emphasized, but it was at on a policy discussion, something like research was going on. Okay, what is happening? All of a sudden, this 2008, suddenly this happened with the biggest banker. And those aspects which was pointed out in 2001, that has landed true in case of Lehman Brothers. How the governance plays a lot of things has been done in the environment. I don't want to say anything on the environment. And environment is very big chapter, very vast. So speaking light on that is not of no use, basically, wasting of time. So I'm just saying because the governance and the S was missing. So governance, how the this impact the business, and why ESG has become so important all of a sudden from 2015 onward. Although in India it has reached very late, because when we started getting impacted because of European and other countries restrictions, demands, these things. In 2012 onward, the multinational companies who are operating business in India, but they are in the multinational domain, either Indian company or the other countries operating in India, they have been doing this sustainability disclosures. And in India, I think most of you are aware that SEBI has come out with the guideline, and for some sort of 1000 top 1000 bis, that is very tricky marking, top 1000. And then the question comes ki for those top 1000, who are the supplier, who are the manufacturers, who are the suppliers and the customers, they also will be covered in that. So then you can understand how much the scope goes. And now BIS, Bureau of Indian Standard, they are also planning, and draft is already out. I'm also one of the member in that. So we are trying to develop, BIS is trying to develop it that way that it can be adopted by any organization, whether it's a voluntary or not. And SEBI standard is slightly meeting to specific investor requirement. And why it has become like everywhere, if you see EU standard, US standard, or now Australia has adopted, and so many places it has been done. Why it is mainly financial related? Because ultimately it has become a mandatory requirement in the financial statement, because the ultimate objective of ESG is to save the company, bring sustainability so that the company can perform in the longer run. It is not the companies were not taking action or not taking care of the community, although they were doing. But the thing is that the company's operation, what is the response of the community, that time was not available. What company is doing, that was available to everyone. They say, yes, I have spent out of my total budget, I have spent 2%. But ultimately that 2% has been invested, no problem. But what happened? The the community which is directly impacted or indirectly impacted by the business, what is their role? Whether they are satisfied? This story started introspection from 2000. From 70s onward, the Love Canal disaster. From there, it started, and then slowly it went up to 2000. The Love Canal cleaning exercise went up to 2004, and there are series of incidents happening at different places in US, then in Australia, then in other places also. Because what happened? Industry innocently and rather very proactively today, those companies, I don't want to name the companies, those companies who have come out as one of the champions of the sustainability, they rate others. If you go back to their record, it is not that they knowingly had done all the things, but all these bad records were in their book. Because when you are doing business where what slips and what comes out after a decade or 150 years after later, nobody knows. So that way, the management means the governance structure. Governance structure becomes important, and especially when the governance structure gives a transparency basically. If it is transparent, things are coming out, and then society. So governance, society, these two are the threat for the business. If we can address the as on date, since everywhere this climate change has taken over, and the climate change, carbon everywhere, carbon. I do agree that carbon is important, and part of the E part that also comes. But sometimes the society force the companies to close and move the operation. Yes. Dr. Mehta has indicated that time is short. I say thank you, and we will try to meet sooner and have a detailed discussion on the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tripathi. Thank you very much. Dr. Tripathi has already initiated a future discussion between AMTOI members and the Sustainability Foundation of Mumbai Port Trust to have certain specific topic workshops for certain various topics that would affect the industry and, of course, the port authorities. And I think that's a great initiative, Dr. Tripathi. Thank you very much. And we will take advantage of this and maybe even draft out, as we had decided, maybe a general MOU so that everybody is on the same path. Friends, we're running a little late. We have the next presenter. We have two more presentations, and we have a quick session of questions. And of course, please don't leave. We have a whole high tea prepared for you. And believe me, the snacks at the Cricket Club of India is India renowned. So don't miss that. we make the best tea in Bombay at this point of time. So that's another thing. So friends, we have a very eminent presenter in our friend Dr. Miraj Inamdar. Dr. Miraj Inamdar is a faculty member at the National Institute of Securities Market since 2015. Prior to NISM, he worked on various teaching and research projects at the Indian Institute of Capital Markets and IIT Bombay CSC. Dr. Inamdar has 12 years of experience in teaching and research in the fields of ESG integration, BRSR reporting, and data science using R and Python. He has several publications and articles in indexed journals. He is a nodal faculty for sustainability and ESG at NISM. He has conducted many workshops for SEBI, RBI, RIS, and IES. Additionally, Dr. Inamdar is a member of the organizing committee for the NISM SEBI LSE conferences. He has completed MCOM, CMA, MBA, Finance, and a PhD in the field of ESG integration from the University of Bombay. Dr. Inamdar, may I invite you to please give your presentation. Thank you for coming.
So I'll be a little faster. So, Mr. Vivek ji has started mentioning that business should has to take a bigger role, so that the regulator also. So last 2-3 years we have seen that regulator are coming with the various regulation related to the ESG, not only MCA, RBI and SEBI. So SEBI in last 3 years have 3 important regulations. So related to business responsibility and sustainability reporting, ESG disclosures. Second one is related to the ESG mutual funds and ESG rating. So suddenly there is a, you can see that the various ecosystem they have developed. So this is just a protocol disclaimer. So this is my personal opinion that I'm saying. Next. So here you can see that throughout the this last 2 decades, you are seeing that the mandatory regulations are increasing. So not only in Europe, but also you are seeing South Asia Pacific also you are seeing it's increasing, and it's increasing exponentially. Next. So here, if you see the overall with the different nations, so not only in Europe, America and all other countries, you are able to see the various regulations. The important thing is that the recent regulation is more towards the climate disclosures, as earlier disclosure was including toward the social aspect side. So here the recent one which is coming by the Security Exchange Commission USA, after lots of debate in USA, they are also coming with the climate disclosures for the listed company. The disclosure which I am talking about, the BRSR, it is a part of the LODR, listing obligation and disclosure requirement. Means it is as important as the balance sheet and the financial statement of any company. So here the BRSR and sustainability reporting, if you can see, so this is basically a principle based disclosure. So there are 2 kind of the disclosure, like regulation, I will say, rule based and a principle based. So rule based, you can see that the Companies Act 2013, where you can see that everything has been mentioned, means what should be the eligibility of independent director and everything. But here you are seeing that principle based, the statement has been mentioned by this BRSR, that for example, the business should conduct their businesses ethically and transparently. So this statement should be followed not only by the letter but also by the spirit, the motivation behind of this. And this all coming from the MCA in the year 2017, coming out with this NGRBC, National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. Basically, this principle they have adopted from the various deliberation of the nations, from the COP26, 28 there. So you can see that these are the 9 principle, and on the basis of this 9 principle, this BRSR circular is mentioned. So I'm here mentioning about the 2 circular which is very important. First circular which is came in May 2021. So here you can see that this circular having a old performer of how to disclose this ESG related to disclosures, and also this is mentioning about those company which is as per the market capitalization, top 1000 company, they should be covered under this. But the most important circular came in 2023 in 12 July, which is called the BRSR core circular. So this circular is having a performer of the BRSR, the new format of the BRSR, which is has some added element, and most importantly, it is having a BRSR core, which is the subset format of the BRSR, which is having a 9 attributes. And SEBI is asking that those who are already publishing this BRSR, in addition to that, as per the rules they have defined it for the company, they also publish this BRSR core, which is going under the assurance. So assurance, the loose definition of assurance is the auditing this kind of the data. So another one is that this one circular is also worth to mention about the integrated reporting. See, when you are disclosing the data for the, especially for the investor, so only emphasizing on the ESG is not very important, but you also take integral or integrated approach by focusing on a financial as well as a non-financial reporting. So this integrated reporting basically covering this both thing, and they are asking, SEBI asking for the companies to disclose on the basis of this. So BRSR core, so which I want to mention here. So there are the 2 important element in this BRSR core. One is one is they need to disclose this subset of the BRSR, which is a BRSR core from the financial year. If I'm considering this 24-25 to top 250 company has to be covered under this. But the most important thing which I would like to mention here, the disclosure for the value chain. So here the value chain they are discussing about the upstream and downstream. And they are saying that the phase wise manner, they are saying that the companies, those who have business from the upstream as well as the downstream, they also has to mention their 9 attributes related to the BRSR core. So I was checking on a BT Bloomberg terminal. So most of the company where there's upstream and downstream, the logistic company, distributor company, most of the company, you are seeing a 30% of this value chain are consist of this logistic kind of the company. And see this value chain, what they have mentioned is that the value chain consists of the 70% of the business supply as well as the distribution, upstream and downstream. So you can see that one of the company I was filtering out and seeing that how many suppliers are there, how many distributor are there for their company, and I was amazed to see that even some I don't want to take a name, but here they have the more than the 1200 of MSMEs are coming under this lenses of this BRSR core, which the company from the year 2025-26 has to do not only to publish their report but has to audit that their disclosures also. So it's the gamut and scope is very wide. What the sir also has mentioned, that is a very wide scope, not only for the listed company but also for the non-listed company. And here I want to mention that although the BRSR is only for the listed company, MSCA, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, also came out with the BRSR Lite, which is a very light version of or the short version of the BRSR, and asking for the MSMEs, those who are not listed or private companies, they can also adapt and they can disclose. So here, again, if you can see that this is a timeline which is undercovering related to the value chain disclosures and their assurance, means their audit. So what is this 9 attribute of BRSR core? If you're seeing this attribute is mostly related to the environment. 9 out of 5 attributes is related to the environment, and then after social, and then the governance. So before this, talking about the interpretability, the governance, when eminent speaker was talking about governance. So I remember that 3 years back, the Economist has published one edition, and where they are saying E should be cut down from the ESG and separately. But see, G is the gluing forces for this whole of the ESG. If your board is strong, that only you can do a strategic decision, because whatever the disclosures and the initiative and policy has to be adopted, it's a strategical policy. So governance should be strong, then only the E and S will work. So interpretability, the SEBI has asking that if you are adopting some international standards, GRI, SASB, this is standard, so then you need not to publish again it, but you just give the reference in the BRSR report. So this is the interpretability is coming with this reporting format. Next. The GRI also, they are the many companies, the older disclosure, and these are the whole of the gamut. One very good thing is coming with this standards and guideline principles and framework is that IFRS are merging the various other disclosure into the one part. So whatever the GAG you are talking and their calculation, you can see that the same calculation the various other international bodies are also adopting. So I will say that the SEBI has done a very revolutionizing thing, because they have adopted the international norms and international disclosure standards in the form of the framework. And one thing I would like to mention here, if you compare ESRS, the European sustainability reporting, and versus the BRSR reporting, there the disclosure points are more than 1100, while in the BRSR it's just a 400, and it's an optimum one. I will give you a simple example that gender diversity, BRSR is asking about how is the gender diversity and various wages and different aspects. But if you are seeing that some ESRS reporting standards, so they are talking about diversity of religion, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of pay, diversity of age, diversity of education, which is not much needed in the Indian context. So I will say that this BRSR is the optimum one. So if you are adopting the other standard also, you can adopt the BRSR, which is one of the optimum one. So the structure of the BRSR, so as a time constraint, I will just quickly mention it. So we have the general disclosure, management process, and then the most important one is section C, which is asking essential indicators and leadership indicators. Some are the compulsory, some are the voluntary basis. So B is related about the policies, how the policy has to be adopted, because each principle, the policy, company has to frame the policy. That policy has to be adopted by board of directors and has to be publicly displayed through their website and that. So I'm not going in a one by one, but one thing which I would like to mention for the logistic company might be important. So reporting boundaries. So SEBI says that you can disclose the BRSR data related to the standalone basis as well as a consolidated basis. So here it started various question also, means rather this reporting boundary is a physical boundary, means if some companies are having a business in the outside India, so what will happen? Some companies are doing the lease based asset, which generally happen with the logistic companies. So what will happen in that concern? So I think the SEBI is coming out the guideline on this, but see, this is the framework, and how to approach that framework. You should follow the standard. If you go to the GRI and SASB standard, they say that whatever in your control you should disclose. So if with this tagline you are coming, then so irrespective of wherever your business and what kind of the asset is, so you can have before that. So one of the another aspect is related to the air freight and logistic and their material issues. So this disclosure is also asking about the materiality concern. So this is the one tool which has been mentioned by SASB, which has prepared by SASB, now acquired by IFRS. So here, if you are putting the company name or the industry name, so what are the relevant impact or risk arising or impact or material issues which is impacting, you are getting here. So here you can see the emissions and labor laws and are related with that. So with this, I would just want to explain one of the principle and then I will end. Next. So the section C, if you are saying, so here the principle 6 is the most important one, which is related to the environmental related issues. So here you are seeing that not only the BRSR disclosures are there, but also in that 13 are the most essential, are 17 are the related to leadership one. BRSR core, which is the subset which is related to 5 attributes and parameter, and GRI and other standard also do consider that. So what exactly in this? So it is related to the energy consumption, water consumption, GHG in the form of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and all related to this. And last thing which I would like to mention, one study that why the company should adopt the sustainability practices or ESG disclosure. There is one research conducted by NYU Stern where they have did a meta-analysis of the 800 good study, where they have mentioned that if those who are superior in ESG practices, it is impacting their financial performance. And one of the in my research paper which I have found out that those who are doing a good ESG practices, for them taking a loan, their loan cost or weighted cost of capital is decreased as compared to non-ESG compliant companies. It's almost from the 15 bips to the 50 bips percentage. So that's all from my side, and thank you for giving me opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Miraj. It was very informative. My apologies. I couldn't give you much time, but we will take it offline and we'll try and arrange a workshop again, as I said, where we can be a little bit more specific and detailed about BRSR. What came out very eager, and that's where my heart is social and governance also plays a role. And the second thing is, the noose is tightening around our necks. Everything is coming up, whether it's BRSR, it is the CBAM. Very soon we'll have other countries talking about various taxes. So we need to have a conscious effort to be made at our end to be competitive and viable in the markets, and not one day get up in the morning and find that it's too late. So with these words, we can now come to the last speaker of the day, and thereafter we can have some questions. And she's really ready to go. Sivrajani, sorry, we have to maintain the time. So, Sivrajani, I'll just introduce you very briefly. Brings in 14 years of experience in energy efficiency, low carbon planning, urban environment, climate-related strategy and governance, as well as building ESG capabilities within corporates. She has worked on multiple consultancy assignments for bilateral and multilateral organizations, industries, and different ministries and states in India. Sirajani also has co-led projects on waste to energy technology assessments, packaging, and sustainable public procurement. Additionally, she has contributed to policy guidance, capacity building, and the development of training programs aimed at advancing resource efficiency and circular economy. Sivrajani has spent considerable time in rural India and has worked with NGOs for livelihood generation, village electrification, watershed development programs. Armed with an entrepreneurial passion, she's always on the lookout and encourages starting and implementing viable energy environmental based projects. Sivrajani has facilitated and mentored many eco-entrepreneurship programs, and I've had the pleasure to have known her for many years. She's really very passionate about ESG and especially environment. So, time is yours.
A very good evening, and thank you, Dr. Neville, for those kind words. So, distinguished speakers before me and participants, I know I'm here before the question break and the high tea, so I'll try to be short, precise, and let's talk about what is happening in the decarbonization of the ports and maritime sector. Right. Go to the next slide. So what we're going to cover very briefly is look at what is the current emissions landscape. What we often miss is that when we talk about decarbonization, we do not talk about the climate change impact on ports, which is very essential to integrate in any kind of decarb plan that we make. We look at how we integrate climate resilience. What are the actual drivers for decarbonization, which has been talked about by the speakers before as well? What are climate commitments in the maritime sector? Why is this push given? What is it? What are the targets that we would have to achieve? Let's see what kind of pathways are there to achieve the net zero. And let's look at few case studies if there is time. Go to the next slide. So if we look at the So if we look at the emission profile, do you all know, what is the total contribution of the world fleet in 2020 was more than 1,000 million metric tons, which was 3% of the global emissions. And if you actually look at the kind of the vessels, if you look at the container ship, bulk carrier, other vessels, they're more or less equally distributed. And if you look at a port, a typical port, you would see major contribution of your emissions coming in from cargo handling and the transportation, that is your truck and rail. That's them. Now, if we look at key factors, all right, key factors that actually contribute to the emissions, you have the fuel type that's being used, the operational inefficiencies, and even the port system. So this is basically the IMO's GHG study that came out, and they have been able to profile the landscape of emissions. Next slide. Now, coming to the important fact that I wanted to mention or stress upon is that climate change impact on the ports is very, very imperative. And what we need to do is that these decarbonization strategies that we try to introduce should also look at these various components that get affected because of climate change. So if we look at demand, the next slide. Can you go to the next? Yeah. So there are supply of many products which are actually sensitive to climate change, especially agricultural produce. And any kind of, weather disruption, anything would actually lead to, vulnerability of where the source of origin of that particular produce is, its transportation, and even its shelf life, that is throughout the, time period of the port and the logistics sector actually maintaining it. Next, please. So in 2007, we had the port of Newcastle, which was hit by storms, and there was a congestion that witnessed a queue of more than 50 vessels, and which delayed the waiting time of 32 days. And that led to actually customers seeking alternatives of coal from other locations. So this is going to be like one key factor that we will have to integrate in our planning to understand that how do these routes, how any kind of climate related changes that are there should be incorporated in the way we design, in the way we plan for our operations. The next. The other point on navigation and berthing, which Rajiv sir also mentioned, which was on the rising sea level, that's going to be making our kind of operations also going to be difficult. And it is important to keep monitoring what are the weather and the conditions that are there to improve our navigation efficiency. The next important point where we saw material handling, which was one of the more prominent emission sources also. Your wind speeds can also restrict port operations, how your cranes operate, the high weather conditions of heavy rain, whether there is, the goods that are actually being handled, how are they susceptible to any kind of weather changes. So increased energy, you would have a higher demand for, having reefer containers as well. So there is everything that is even linked to how which comes into a vicious circle that if I have increased temperatures, I would have high energy cost. High energy cost would again lead to higher emissions. So that's something that, we have to start looking at the entire thing in a more holistic manner. The next slide. Looking at vehicle movements. All right. Vehicle movements also with changes in, I would say, in temperature, in rain, high, heavy precipitation, the wear and tear of the roads is going to create, a lot of problems. Even the rail tracks that are there is going to have problems. So next one. Flooding, which you would even notice in case of, how your electrical equipments are more vulnerable. Actually, business interruption is also a key factor that we would have to take. So what I'm trying to emphasize out here is that we have to look at decarbonization with also a perspective of how we would be able to avoid business interruption and any kind of an asset related loss that would happen due to climate change. Could go to the next slides. I think we can skip. And here comes the social part of it. You have workers. You need to even ensure that, their health and safety concerns are also taken care of. And of course, the next slide, where environmental impacts that we keep talking, we've been seeing over the last few presentations, that you have activities which would lead to, more, I would say, more, you need to take care of more environmental impact. Now, keeping this in mind, what we also see is that ports are key for economic development. And the movement of your fleet is going to keep increasing year on year. Now, with different, targets that have been set, however you see the growth, the path of decarbonization to reduce the emissions is going to be there. And there is only one particular point in which you would be able to introduce, say, internal measures, energy saving measures that are possible. But what are you going to do to actually bring down, what are your emissions levels which are actually caused by your supply chain, actually caused by partners or the allied agencies who are associated with you all in bringing about the change. So if you could do next slide. So what we looking? Two things. One is mitigation, where we are talking about the decarbonization efforts that bring into picture. The other one is adaptation, where we actually action to manage the risks that are there because of climate change. So when we look at, say, mitigation, go for clean energy, go for energy efficiency, look at sustainable transportation, electrify your, your equipments. Adaptation, try to build flood protection, improve your infrastructure. What is important next is that you start decarbonizing across your value chain. You start managing your physical and your transition risks. And then you start building your entire climate resilience. So it's always a two-pronged approach that we would have to use, in addressing decarbonization in the ports and the maritime sector. Now, if we look at the drivers, the first driver is a regulatory pressure, or something that we would call as, something mandatory to be done. So the International Maritime Organization has set targets. You need to reduce 40% of your CO2 emissions by 2030, 70% by 2050. You have even the sulfur cap. You have national regulations, national emission standards. We've even heard about how CBAM is going to come and play. We have the Maritime India Vision 2030, the Harit Sagar Green Port Guidelines. These are drivers who are, a kind of a regulatory push that's going to come and start making ports and organizations in the maritime sector to decarbonize. You also have market and economic drivers, carbon pricing. So we also heard Mr. Pritesh talk about, the inclusion of maritime emissions in the EU's emission trading scheme. There is a demand for green shipping. So shipping is going to come in every scope 3 emissions calculations that you do. And your the users, your end users, are going to prefer that you provide a greener, sustainable supply chain. There is more of competitiveness. Green ports will start attracting more business. And last, what you see is technological advancements. You have electrification, shore power coming for your vessels, electric cargo handling equipments, and the emergence of what I would say is digitization and smart port technologies, which is going to help in routing and optimizing your routes. The next. So if we just have to look at these commitments, so let's look at it like from India's commitment. 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, where the agreement was to keep the global average temperature below 2 degrees and strive to 1.5 degrees. At that time, even India in 2021 pledged to become net zero by 2070. So all sectors are going to come under this particular gamut, where India's objective is to attain a non-fossil energy capacity of 500 gigawatts and 50% of its energy needs from renewable energy. So keeping this in mind, even the port logistics sector is going to be pushed into making choices which are to go in towards non-fossil fuel and also to source energy from renewable energy sources. Let's go to the next slide. So similarly, you have the IMO's the mandate of targets and the Maritime India vision as well on what they want to do for the green port sector. Next slide. The Harit Sagar Green Port guidelines also. So where you basically have a framework for major ports to enable reductions in GHG emissions, and also to kind of give a push for port operations with a focus on clean fuel, energy, and waste minimization. You have the National Center of Excellence in Green Port and Shipping, which was established basically to promote carbon neutrality and circular economy. You have the Green Truck Transition Program. So there are a lot of initiatives already in place. Things are already in momentum. And it's just that we have to start, getting onto this particular train or, these commitments and start moving towards that. The next slide. So we've just mapped across, all these different targets, all these different commitments cover various parameters. One would be on clean fuels. That is whether you're using LNG or hydrogen. One parameter is on green cover. What is the extent of green cover that you need to have on ports? How do you need to electrify port equipments? What is the kind of infrastructure in terms of LNG bunkering that you need to have? Renewable energy. What's the share of renewable energy that you need to have? The next slide. Also, on the shore to ship power supply, you have the Maritime India vision and the Harit Sagar talking about shore to ship power supply. Use of energy efficient equipment, and what is the GHG emission reduction target that you need to achieve. Now, keeping all these, these commitments, these frameworks in place, there is a plan already set where they actually, kind of detail out what are the different parameters in terms of fuel, in terms of energy, in terms of renewable energy that you need to start implementing so that you have your decarbonization activities implemented. Let's go to the next slide. So now, when we actually talk about decarbonization, yes, these are parameters that are set by different commitments that are there. But it doesn't just work on a project-to-project basis. What we've said is that if there is an emission source, you don't just go and say, okay, I'll just put a solar, or I'll have a battery, a battery backup to compensate for my emissions. What you actually need is a policy-level intervention, which would then actually trickle down to programs being implemented. And finally, you go to the emission source to actually mitigate and look at each of the hotspots that result in your emissions. So if I'm looking at policy interventions, these are all, I would say umbrella level interventions that you would have to put into place. If you go to the next slide. The next slide. the next one as well. Yeah. So what we are talking about here is like you could look at green buildings as, you know, as a policies, like say we go in for any kind of a certified green building, because that encompasses many parameters that would be resulting in reduction of emissions. The second important is having a sustainable public procurement, sustainable procurement policies, where you actually decide whether who you're going to purchase from, how well they are in their performance in environmental parameters. You basically introduce the concept of life cycle costing, so that what you choose, you know, as a service or a product from them also results in a reduced emission. And third is introducing the concept of internal carbon pricing, which many organizations and corporates are doing right now, where they're assigning a monetary value to the carbon emissions that you emit. So this becomes a corpus where you could actually incentivize different interventions or projects that you would be able to take to reduce your carbon emissions. Now, next, if we go at program level interventions, we did see, you know, how any kind of reporting, any kind of disclosure tries to bring in that transparency, tries to make sure whether you have actually, you know, calculated your emissions, whether, you know, there is a kind of a system in place that you are aware of what you're measuring, of what you're emitting, and how you're able to track progress on your emission reductions. So it's important to start, you know, reporting on your sustainability or your ESG parameters. Then look at the supplier code of conduct. It's just not only your organization or the port or the logistic partner who's doing business. It's important that you create an ecosystem where your suppliers also align with your decarbonization targets, because it's very difficult for as an entity to you for any organization or any port organization to just go on with, you know, with them reducing their specific emissions. You know, conducting periodic energy audits, good office practices. Next. You know, and what is very important is the awareness. You make any commitment, you have to get the entire organization and its people along. What generally we find is that it's generally a top down driven, you know, initiative, but you need to take everybody along, you know, to reduce for this initiative of decarbonization. And designate climate warriors, give people the, you know, opportunity to actually start working, to start, you know, giving them the responsibility of, you know, of how they would be able to introduce with the peers in their departments that they are working, and finally get a proper monitoring and evaluation system in place. So the next, so what we've done is we've just shortlisted a few decarbonization measures which we have, you know, kind of looked at: shore power, electrification of port equipment, looking at alternative fuel infrastructure, CCUS, renewable energy integration, hydrogen production. The next, digitization, energy efficiency programs, introducing circular economy practices, and collaborative decarbonization initiatives. So this is the entire two points that I want to bring across, is that you need to integrate climate change adaptation as well in your entire decarbonization strategy. And second, it is not only about such kind of measures. It needs to be driven with policy level interventions. It needs to have programmatic kind of interventions, so as to actually make sure your decarb strategies are well implemented and are sustainable. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shivrajan. Friends, as I said, we are running too late, but I hope you enjoyed this seminar, and there'll be many more from the AMTOI ESG Council. May I now request Mr. Vivek Kele to say a few words to end this thing, and also please honor the panelists with a small memento and good wishes.
So, may I request my colleagues from AMTOI, Sharmila and Nilesh, to join me here, and can we have, so starting with Jalota sir, please. Nilesh. Yeah, Dr. Inanda. Dr. Akash. Mr. Biswas. So, yeah, Shivaranjan. One small question for Dr. Inamda. You mentioned, yeah, you can please take your seats. That MSME, some 1200 companies, and everybody is going to be affected by the new guidelines. So, can you just elaborate here? Because I think a lot of companies sitting in this forum are potentially, need to take act on it. So, can you elaborate? Because your slide mentioned 1000 companies, 250 companies, listed companies. So, how do the MSME come into the picture here? If you can just elaborate.
So there are the three aspects. One is related to BRSR. General BRSR format is applicable to 1000 company, listed company. For financial year 23-24 onwards, it's mandatory to top 1000 company. Then comes the BRSR core, which is for the top 250 companies to disclose that 9 ratios. And from the next year 24-25, their value chain of the companies, their disclosure related to the 9 attributes, the company has to disclose. So those coming in the upstream and downstream, 70% those who have contributing in that, in their upstream and downstream, they are covering under this thing. So there is a huge gamut. So recently 2 months back, SEBI, I think, also realized that how big they are covering, means how many people, how many SMEs are covering under this value chain system. So SEBI has come with the one consulting paper and saying that instead of 70% of the whole their supply value chain, why not only those who have a more than 2% contribution among this 70%? So they have issued this consulting paper trying to reduce that, but still there is no circular related to that reducing that scope for the value chain system. But still there is a huge scope for the means that the companies, those who are making a business, and this is also one business opportunities for the MSMEs, because the company will ask their supply chain or distributor that you should compare with the GHG emissions or energy emissions and their disclosure. You give the data to us, then only we will give the business to you. So that might be happen, and this already happened with those who are doing a business with the Europe. So they are also impelling their value chain system that you should disclose that. So that's that.
Thank you. I think we've been warned by our host CCI that our time slot is coming to an end. So I thank all the honorable panelists here for coming and spending your time here and sharing and kickstarting this initiative of AMTOI of embarking on creating a roadmap for the logistics industry in terms of understanding what ESG is about and how we can comply and how we can become partners to the trading and manufacturing enterprise in India and help them to achieve the overall ESG goals. Yeah. So with all the panelists, can we have a quick picture with all the panelists? You can continue to you can continue to speak. And whilst we
One
post.
further clarification, rather advisory, that those MSMEs who are dealing with the top brands, top companies, they need to start their ESG that light. Yes. I already there is a ESG light.